Oi, g'day punters. It's Konrad here from Punters Politics. I'm sitting next to Michael West of the Michael West. Now, I'm next to him because Michael West and his journalists are the ragtag bunch of people that I use for a lot of the information in my reel. So if it wasn't for journalists actually following the money, I wouldn't have the great content that I'm producing right now. So we're going to chat in this episode about the biggest scam that Australia is facing and the biggest scam pulled on Australian punters like you. It's multinational tax avoidance. It's a scam, and we're going to try and understand it a little bit more.
G'day guys, great to be here with Konrad from Punters Politics, rising Instagram star. It's fantastic. We're going to be talking about multinational tax avoidance, the sexiest topic alive.
Well, I hope you're going to make it sexy.
We're going to try. We're going to give it a go. But it is, I think just to preface it, it is the biggest scam in the world by dollar value.
We are a laughing stock, I think, when it comes to this topic. The thing that outrages punters on my Instagram the most is when I touch on the big dogs, Santos, Exxon, the guys that take our resources, don't pay for it, and the rub really seems to be they don't even pay tax.
Well, when you can say to somebody, how much tax did you pay last year? Let's say it's 20 grand.
Yeah.
And then you tell them that Exxon, the giant US oil company, made $15 billion in income last year and they didn't pay any tax. So you paid 20 grand more than Exxon paid.
That's I am the backbone of the economy.
You are the backbone.
So, okay, so here's the rub. We've got punters out there taking their paycheck, and on whatever they get in their bank account, let's say you're a lucky punter and you're getting 100 grand a year, you're paying mostly a 37% on every dollar that comes into your bank account. However, and if you're a small business, you're paying, is it 30%? That's the business tax rate?
30% is the corporate rate, whether you're a big business or a small business.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're a multinational, massive billion-dollar corporation, these people are paying zero.
Well, some of them are.
Some of
because
them.
You're paying, if you're an individual and
Yes.
you're making 100K a year, you're paying your 30% tax or whatever your marginal rate is.
Yes, you're welcome.
On your total income. But if you're a company, you're not paying on your total income, you're paying on your profit.
Right.
And you make up what your profit is.
Okay.
There are rules around it, but essentially, if you're a multinational, you don't want to make a profit in Australia because you want to make it somewhere else. Because if you make a profit in Australia, you have to pay 30% tax on it.
So we're used to the concept that, of course, a business pays taxes on the profits earned. It seems like something that makes sense.
Yep.
However, what are some figures that are showing us that something is not right? Right, the average business person, they buy their tools, their everything, and then they do their taxes and go and then pay tax on the profit. Why is this a problem?
Well, that's correct. If you're a small business, you pay to, and that's a bona fide work expense, and your truck and whatever you use in your business.
Yep.
But of course, the difference between the tradie and the multinational tax avoider is that one thing: it's multinational. If you have the ability to create foreign entities, other companies around the place to suck the money out to, then, and if you're a billionaire or a large corporation, that gives you the leeway. You'll find that companies like BHP and Rio Tinto and Westpac and CBA, they all pay a lot of tax. But
they're good taxpayers.
They're very good, and they're Australian multi.
CBA.
And even Gina and Twiggy are good taxpayers now.
Congrats.
So
that's good.
Well, they are Australian multinationals. You see what I mean?
Why are they paying?
Their head offices are here. This is where they record their profit.
Why don't they do it?
But if you're Glencore or you're Exxon or you're a
Yancoal.
foreign bank or Yancoal, you're going to want to show your foreign shareholders how much profit you've made in Shanghai or the UK, London or New York.
Right.
That's where. So the drug companies make all the big profits back in America.
Okay.
And the tech companies.
Yep.
And here they make very little profit or sometimes losses deliberately. It's just a matter of not making a profit in Australia.
So people will say, oh, well, that's really smart. Like, smart businessman, good on them. Like, avoid the tax man. I'd do it if I could. So two things. Rebut that argument. And then how do I do it if I could?
There are a cut that is, I mean, the law is there to be adhered to, but also to be, you can run close to it, obviously.
Yeah.
And so there is an argument to say if you can get out of doing
Yes.
it. And people often say to me, "Oh, mate, you don't know what you're talking about because it's legal."
It's legal.
Well,
What's
it's
the problem?
not. It's not really legal. You see, what happens is there's a few bigwigs at the ATO, a few people in Treasury, and a small tight fraternity of tax lawyers, and of course the big four: PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, and what's the other one? EY, dodgy old EY. So there is a small fraternity of very highly paid people who spend their life helping corporations and billionaires get out of paying tax. Because when you think about it, if labour is usually the biggest cost in a business, right?
Yep.
But 30% of every dollar is your tax. So if you can pay somebody $1 million a year to get rid of your $30 million liability, they call it leakage in those circles. We just stop all leakage. We don't want to pay any tax. But there is a law. It's called Part 4A of the Tax Act, and it says that you cannot do a transaction principally for tax. It's got to have commercial reason. Right. So it's all about...
So there's a loophole.
Yeah, but they never prosecute under this. So really, the whole thing isn't really legal. It's not really highly illegal. It's all highly debatable. Whether this transaction has been done, the interest rate on this loan, for instance, is at 8% or 6%, which is, when does it become illegal?
Yeah. So one part of it is, it's kind of illegal already, but the laws are not enforced. So I'm going to paint a picture and then you tell me if this is roughly what it is for punters like me to understand. We've got a foreign-owned entity.
Yep.
And it's operating in Australia. And they don't want to make a profit. So they want to move their profits overseas. But you're saying that's kind of illegal. You're not allowed to shift things just for
the sake of tax.
Just for the sake of tax.
That's right.
So it's kind of illegal. But then they do their own taxes.
Well, you've got to come up with bullshit structures, which is what tax lawyers do.
Yes.
They just come up with fake structures.
So they go to a tax lawyer and they say, how do I minimise all my profit so I have no profit in Australia?
That's exactly
I won't pay tax if I have no profit.
Yep.
And then the government employs a company called PwC to oversee and audit these companies. So it's an honours system. So the private corporation simply does its taxes, shifts the money where it wants to shift it, and then the government has outsourced its auditing, and PwC is working for both the government and the corporation at a certain point.
The government doesn't have any, except for government companies, corporate like the ABC, which is done by the National Audit Office. It's all privatised. The big four, PwC, etc., they audit.
So the government doesn't audit anybody. It's
they
PwC.
only audit government corporations. So it's all these, it's PwC, EY, KPMG and Deloitte. Four companies globally audit 95% of the world's biggest companies.
So we've privatised...
And they do their tax advice as well. So there's a Chinese wall here with a guy saying, avoid tax, and the other guy saying, we're going to audit and tick off on your accounts, say it's all true and fair.
So, okay, there's a company that does the tax loophole, that does the taxes for the corporation, and that might be PwC, for example.
Yep.
And then PwC puts on a different hat
and is the auditor
and works
as well.
And says, okay, I've done your taxes, all loopholes secure. Whoop, time to audit you. Oh, everything looks good and is in order here. That's roughly what's happening.
I'll tick that.
So the government has, like, its job would be to police and enforce the law. It's essentially outsourced its police enforcement to a private company, to themselves. They're just saying...
Yeah, it's a huge conflict of interest. It's a massive conflict of interest. But, of course, the test of it is really its cost. How much does it cost to drag PwC and Chevron into court? Now, the reason I use those, because that was a historic win for the tax office, right? So when people say, oh, it's legal, legal, well, it's only legal because you haven't been dragged through the court.
It's not legal, you just haven't been found guilty of it.
I mean, Chevron told the ATO, we are going to make this cost you. If you drag us into court, it's going to cost you $30 million.
Yeah.
I mean, how much does the ATO commissioner, Jordan, I mean, he's going to look, 30 million, can we afford to take these guys to court? What's that going to do to our budget if we've got to spend 5 years and $30 million fighting these shysters? In the end, they did. It was a global historic thing.
But how much did they get when they won?
Oh, they won all their costs. I mean, if you win,
that's it.
You get your costs and
did
so on.
Did they get fined?
And
did anyone go to jail?
They penalised them and got penalties out of them.
Anyone go to jail?
they will never send anybody to jail.
I'm pretty sure
The bigger the
if I
theft-
fudged my tax return consistently and deliberately, I'm almost certain I would see prison time. What the hell is going on?
The bigger the crime, the lesser the penalty, usually,
Okay, so you've got, what's the analogy? You've got people guarding themselves, right? They're auditing themselves and saying, oh, funnily enough, guess what? No crimes committed. Excellent. And the government goes, good job, PwC. We'll just be over here not enforcing the laws we have, right? So we've got that half of it. And then we've got the deterrent of the government doesn't have the resources to enforce these laws because they have so many lawyers and...
There's so much money in it. If it's 30 cents in every dollar, which is the corporate tax rate, your incentive, let's say Google. Google bring in about $10 billion in revenue in Australia. Massive. Apple brings in even more, right?
Yep.
These big tech companies, incredibly profitable because, of course, they've got huge profit margins because they don't actually, they're just a bunch of computers, really.
Yeah.
It's just a marketing.
Okay.
They get the slaves to do it over in China.
Yes.
Cheaper. So the profit margins are gigantic.
Yep.
What happens to that $10 billion that comes into Google Australia? Well, if you go to the minutiae in the back of their accounts, you'll find they get it all out in service agreements. So they say, we're going to pay $6 or $7 billion out of that $10 billion that we got in the door this year from providing Australians with their internet services.
Yep.
We're going to take 7 of that and we're going to pay this company in Bermuda or Cayman Islands
Which
or
they
wherever,
own.
which they own.
Oh, my gosh.
So they pay a company they own somewhere else $7 billion in service fees, which is for providing services.
So it's
or intellectual property. It's like saying Google Maps. Google Maps is based in. We've re-domiciled that. It was half Aussie invention, but they offshored it.
I didn't know.
And so it's now. Let's say it's in Bermuda.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to pay Google Maps like 50 million a year out of our,
So
for that intellectual property.
So if punters wanted to do this scheme, let's say it wasn't just for the wealthy, rich international corporations. If we were to this scheme, so you don't want to make profits in Australia, that's the game. Because if you make a profit, it'll get taxed. And then if they do get taxed on the tiny bit they say they made the profit, they go, oh, we're paying everything we owe. Right? That's the line. We pay everything we owe. So if I, as a punter, wanted to do it, it's as if Punters Politics is going really well. I'm making lots of money, Michael. It's great. But I've got to do my taxes soon and my profit's looking really hot. How about I send my dad to live in Bermuda, set up a house in Bermuda where there's zero taxes, and then my dad sends me an invoice. How much did you make this year, Konrad? Oh, I made $100,000. Okay, well, turns out my services for consulting your company is $99,000. I go, oh, damn it, Dad. All right. Is that kind of like a really oversimplified analogy of
That's exactly
it's the same bloody family, the money's in the family,
Yep.
and what you've done is just scam, because the real scam seems to be companies operate in our country, they use our infrastructure, our network, our resources, our customers, we're all buying stuff from Apple, etc., etc. They make billions in profit, and then they so it's money fairly earned here, right? Everyone else has to pay tax, but then they just essentially shift it through. One example you were saying is they shift it through. So the question is now is how do they shift it? If we're coming down to, we know they shift it. What are the methods they use?
We can see how they shift it, depending on
you
how.
can see how they shift it.
Well, you've got to go to the back of their accounts to find out what parties are the related parties. In there's a boring section, usually note 23, which is called related party transactions.
You read it. This is good.
Related party transactions. And they are transactions with yourself. Taking it from one pocket, Australia, to another pocket, Singapore.
Related party transactions.
That's what they are. They're the three kinds.
Yes.
One you've just mentioned.
Yep.
Your dad decides to consult.
Consultancy.
That's a service. That's intellectual property. He's providing a service to you, so you pay him. Well, there's three things. There's royalties on intellectual property that travel overseas and take money out of Australia.
So on that one, it would be Apple Australia uses the logo of Apple Ireland or whatever, and so the bill comes in. Oh, I saw the logo on our building. That's an expensive
or
logo
Pfizer for the COVID drug because they spent all this money developing the drug, millions developing the drug. So we need to pay them royalties or intellectual property payments for
Using the
you
drug.
for the benefit, because we can't just spend all this time and money. Usually they just buy it from some university on the cheap, but
Yep.
we can't spend all this money developing drugs if we don't get paid for it.
Yes.
So patents protect their intellectual property for many
Yes.
years until they come off patent. So intellectual property is one way,
Yep.
interest on loans is another, and the third way is dividends or returns on capital on equity. So there's intellectual property, equity or shares, and debt.
Debt.
Or
So
bonds.
in the punter example, Dad's overseas. He loans me some money at a really high interest rate, so that I'm siphoning the money out through interest rate payments to him.
Through a loan. So he writes a loan from Punters Dad Limited in Bermuda,
Yep.
and he lends you $1 million.
At an
And he
exorbitant
says-
interest rate.
And the interest rates, he's borrowing at 5%,
Yeah.
but he's lending it to you at 10.
Yeah.
Right? This is just an example.
Yeah.
So he's making 100% there. Now,
Yes.
so tax office is going to go, oh, that 10% looks a bit high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rupert did it with Foxtel. It was a huge tax scam. A news corporation did it with Foxtel.
Yep.
Foxtel was dripping in cash when it was a complete monopoly before Netflix came along. It was
Yeah.
making so much money, yet it borrowed all this money from News Corp, even though it was spinning out the cash, and was paying up to 15%.
News Corp overseas or whatever.
News Corp, I think it was the Australian thing. But in any case, Foxtel, when it didn't need the money, was given this fucking big loan, and the interest on that loan at a huge rate was going out to News Corp. So that's how
Okay.
they were getting the money out of Foxtel.
The company,
Back
so
to
that
News
Foxtel,
Corp.
we didn't make a profit this
Yeah.
year. Oh, our
Yeah.
interest loans. Oh, what a silly loan we just did.
Yeah. So they borrowed this huge amount of money which they didn't need to borrow for. So that was fake. And when we pointed it out, they sort of pulled their head in and changed it. Didn't apologise, of course, for just robbing all that money. But
No.
every company pretty much does it. It's how aggressive
Yes.
they are, and
Yep.
the billionaires too. And some don't mind paying tax and see it now as more of a social responsibility, but they still manage it. So the other way is Mr. Punter in Bermuda
Yep.
or Singapore, loan to Punter Junior here,
Yep.
interest on the loan goes out,
Yep.
and then, or you might do a return of capital.
Yeah.
So you issue him some shares from
Yep.
Australia. He sets up a company.
my dad's
over
got
there.
5 shares
and
of
you pay a
Punters.
dividend on the share.
Okay, so that's the final way. So punter
That's
dad,
another
he
way.
bought some shares, so I've got the cash, and then to siphon the money out, I'm like, oh, great return on investment this year for you, heaps. And once I pay all these shares off, oh, my profit's gone. Damn, sorry, ATO.
It can be a capital return. So there are different ways of getting the money out, but essentially 3 ways.
Yep.
And that's what tax lawyers do. They essentially change the shape of money.
Yes.
So the money changed shape. So it might leave Australia as interest on a loan.
Yep.
It might get to America and be turned into, if you want to get the money out to Europe.
Yes.
It might be a deal with, say, Spain or something or Netherlands, which has special intellectual property rules. You're paying a royalty to your to your company over there, and then it might come back to another country as a return on capital for some service.
Yeah.
Apparently often.
And the rub is that you're saying this is already illegal. It's just not enforced because we've got the fox in charge of the hen house.
Well, it's only illegal if you can
Prove.
it's only legal if you can be comfortable that the ATO is not going to drag you into court because they don't think they'll be able to win by saying, mate, this is just a tax scam. This isn't a real transaction.
Because you could follow the numbers and let's say the ATO, for whatever reason, decides to not let a private corporation that consults these companies audit these companies. Let's say the ATO woke up overnight and went, hang on, we need some...
Government auditor.
Punters would like to build roads and hospitals and schools.
Yeah.
We need some cash. Let's get it from the people that have it. The ATO could look at these books and go, well, that interest rate's a bit high. Prove to me that that's a legitimate thing. Oh, this entity is owned by, you own both these entities, and these royalty payments are above a standard, what an expert would deem reasonable, et cetera, et cetera. There is the possibility that using our current laws, if the ATO pulled its thumb out and started working for we the people and not corporations, they could take these people to court and actually scrape back some money. That's like always a possibility in our current system we have now.
Well, you can't take everybody to court. That's the
No?
point.
Okay, why
Well, you
not?
can't. Well, you could actually get it to do like a withholding tax. You could say, we're going to keep the money and you have to prove to us that we think
Right.
that you're transaction is kosher.
Yes.
Because really what we're talking about here, a lot of it is transfer pricing. Everyone's heard of that. But it's like this. And this is what BHP and Rio and Glencore, particularly the
mining
former,
companies,
they
right.
got busted doing, right? They're digging coal out of the ground and they're selling it to Japan, let's say. Right? So what do? They set up a marketing hub in Singapore.
Right.
So there's another BHP or another Rio Tinto in Singapore.
Yep.
Then they sell their coal on the cheap to this mob in Singapore.
And don't make a profit.
And then they transfer price at... No, they make a loss from Australia.
Oh, they make a loss. How
But
generous.
suddenly
Wow.
they've got this coal on the cheap in Singapore.
Yeah.
Let's face it, Singapore doesn't use a lot of coal, does it? Because it's a tiny little place. It's Japan or China where it's going. Right. They on-sell it at a higher rate to the end customer who's not...
And Singapore makes all the profit. Australian mining company makes a loss.
And the point of that is because Singapore, the corporate tax rate, say if you're Rio, is 5%.
Yes.
In Australia, it's 30%.
Yeah.
So you want to be making a profit in Singapore, paying 5% on your thing. So they jack the price up and then sell it on. This Singapore marketing hubs, they called it. The ATO cracked down on it. BHP and Rio had to apologise. And
they said sorry? Oh, well, I feel better.
Well, they said sorry to a Senate inquiry, but they weren't very apologetic. In fact,
did they say sorry with some money?
I'm not sure about the penalties, but
and no one went to
this
jail.
is what everybody does. Everybody transfer prices. So you sell, drug companies, for instance, they all pay a little bit of tax, drug companies.
Pfizer and all these.
Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, all the big global drug companies. They all pay a little bit of tax in Australia, right? But effectively, we're talking about a whole lot of pills generally made in China because that's where all the manufacturing's done. Huge intellectual property payments, and when it gets to Australia, the prices are jacked. And the other thing is it's PBS, so we're paying for it mostly anyway because it's all the PBS is like $15 billion.
What's the PBS?
Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme.
Oh, right, the government.
Which is $15 billion of our money given to the pharmacy industry effectively to subsidise drugs.
Yeah.
So some drugs aren't on the PBS.
Yes.
So they're getting a double kick here. They're not paying much tax, and it's public money. Subsidising essential drugs.
Because the incentives around all of this seem to be these companies make billions of dollars not paying tax to Australia, and the risk to them, if you're just making a simple calculation, we could make $80 billion by not paying tax in a few years. Great. What's the odds of getting audited? Low, because our buddies at PwC who do our accounts, they're not going to audit us. So we know that for sure. But if we did, let's say public whipped up a bit of a frenzy, Albo looks and, I better do something about that. What's the risk? Well, sounds like they're getting small fines. No one goes to jail. So you look at the balance sheet of risk versus reward. Even if you get caught, even if you pay a fine, it's 1% of what you made doing the currently potentially illegal activity. So if you're just making a savvy business decision, well, of course you'd do this because you're not going to get caught. And even if you do, you throw them a penny and they go away. That's the math?
That's the math.
So then I'd like to name and shame some companies that are doing this. But when I looked at the list, because I looked at your website here, I've used it for one of my Punters Politics skits, and I went to the names I know, like there's the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks, everyone's on there. And you've put it down the side here where I can see the tax rate paid, and then you've got the total income, and then the taxable income. Now, talk to me about the difference between total income and then taxable income, because I'm looking at...
So the reason we do that, it's really critical to the method, to the methodology here, because you'll have, say, let's just take...
Who's a company?
Where's one that has got a... Let's just take Yancoal, okay, because that's a little bit... So they've got...
Chinese mining company,
Chinese coal mining company that operates in Australia. So they've got... in the door. This is 9-year figures, right? So it's over 9 years.
This is 9 years.
It's over 9 years.
So they've got in $31 billion.
$31 billion. They've got in $31 billion, okay, by selling coal.
Yeah.
Digging it out of the ground and selling it.
Yeah. Our
then
coal.
they've actually, the second row is the taxable income. So on that, unlike Chevron and Exxon, who declared they just had no profit no taxable income, 9 years of operating.
9.
That's how aggressive they were. They said, we're not making a profit in Australia, even though we've been siphoning gas out of the Bass Strait since the 1970s for massive profits, oil and gas. That's Esso originally, now Exxon. They've managed to get their profit down to nothing. But in the case of Yancoal, they've said, OK, over the 9 years, we've got 30 billion in the door, and we actually made profits
of 63
million.
Now, I hope a graph pops up here that shows the total income. I'm going to pretend it's here and I'm looking at it. Look at this. Whoa, this is outrageous. Total income, 31 billion. And this right here, I don't know if it's even popping up on the graph next to a number so big. That's what they said that they earned in profit over 9 years.
That's their profit.
And then on that number, that's what they are supposed to pay 30% tax on.
And their tax rate, they paid 0.2%.
2% tax.
So the point is, often you'll find with the tax rate, 30% of bugger all is bugger all.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't really matter.
The
big one is in getting rid of your profit, the taxable income.
And that's what they did.
Well, that's where your big one is. So when you look at these companies like, Google is a classic example.
Yeah, we can find
how did
Google
Google
here.
say they make virtually no profit? How could they possibly when they got $10 billion coming
Mining
in the
companies
door?
can at least say, with royalties and big mining equipment, it's so expensive, etc., etc. What the hell's Google spending their money on?
They're spending their money on tax lawyers getting out of the country, mate.
Clearly. And it works. So, the thing I found...
And Apple, what does it really... what does it really cost?
Yes.
What do these things really cost?
Yeah.
Have they got... they got an Apple store in Chatswood or wherever,
And here's the rub. The tax that the government is mostly using when we put these figures into how it affects us, the punters, is that we're getting more tax from you, the punter, buying the product and paying a GST than they are making it and selling it to you on that end. So we're clearly the backbone of I was looking at state budget, the Queensland state budget, and a super low percentage came from mining royalties, and most of it comes from GST, meaning most of the state budget comes from the punters out there buying products, using stuff, etc., etc. And so the thing I found challenging about this list here, and I'd be curious as we just go through a few, the biggest tax dodgers are all these weird holdings companies. All right, so I just want to move through a couple of these because there's products that people will be familiar with that you won't know if you're just looking at what is it, BPIH? What's that one?
BPIH is Multiplex. It's a big property developer. It's Canadian
property developer. And
it's called Brookfield.
International
But
power.
they have these fancy names like BPIH because they don't want anybody to understand who they are. Because when you have a look
we'll
at
put their logo up here just so everybody...
There's going to be no BPIH logo. No, it's all... Glencore was so sneaky once. We got to the top of
Glencore
their tree.
Mining Company.
Glencore are the worst tax dodgers in the world.
Glencore, you got that, everybody?
Glencore. Bad tax cheats.
Bloody Glencore, ripping you off. Well, look, talking about you.
And then they whinge about it and try and pretend that we're victimising them.
Poor
but anyway, Glencore, we busted them. It took it was something like 200 searches back in the day, in the old newspaper days. We're going through, spending all this money doing these corporate searches to get to the top of the Glencore tree.
Yeah.
And there's just a number there. There's just a number. They didn't even... This is how their tax lawyers, who I think I know actually, this is how they try to disguise it, by not even having a company name. That's why we couldn't figure it out. And there it was just a number.
Wow.
So you'll notice a lot of these guys at the top of the list, like Ford, obviously. We know who they are. We know who Vodafone are.
Who's the one that owns all our public
And Qantas probably should be on there, but because of the methodology, they're not Virgin. They've never paid tax in Australia. But then again, airlines do have a lot of big years of losses. But you'll get other ones like BPAH or Wilmar, for instance, is the biggest sugar company in the Southern Hemisphere. That's Singapore controlled.
Singapore sugar
They
company.
never pay much tax.
Which one's the one that owns the roads and hospitals and stuff?
Well, that's Brookfield, BPIH.
Oh, that's
an
BPIH.
infrastructure. Yeah, they
own...
Well, they own Healthscope, which owns 41 private hospitals.
They own hospitals? Private or public hospitals?
Private.
Private hospitals. They own what, roads?
They've got infrastructure assets, things like they've got a WA rail business. So what they like is their regulated monopolies. They like good old solid government money coming in.
The government privatises it to these blokes.
Yeah.
These blokes charge the government and the
back, and it's the private health and so on.
And then our public infrastructure, essentially, we pay for it and it doesn't even pay tax.
Then they sell it and then doesn't even pay tax.
And then the money goes to...
That's the problem. And the biggest one that I used to enjoy hopping into, which used to be right up at number 2 in the top 40 tax, we've been doing it for like 8 years now.
Yes.
Good old Energy Australia.
Oh.
Energy Australia, which is one of the big three.
Yeah.
AGL, Energy Australia and Origin.
More like public infrastructure,
what
right?
they call the gentailers. So they own coal mines, they own RE as well, and they own gas plants, and then, of course, gentailers because they generate the energy, and then they, all the way through cradle to grave.
So they dig it, burn it, sell it.
Well, no, that goes down the coat hangers, which are the transmission tower, then through the pipes and
they
wires,
own that as well?
which is distribution. Yeah, and then they have the retailers. They're the people that send you the bill.
So you wonder why energy is expensive? Is because...
Well, they privatise most of it.
Most of it's privatised?
Queensland, not so much. You've got the big government entities there. But, what happened with Energy Australia was an absolute classic because I didn't know who owned it. I just assumed, I know that part of it was privatised, like New South Wales government sold the bits off and Victorian government sold bits off.
You hear all the time.
Energy Australia, I thought like it's an Australian company. I've gone to do the company searches finally and I find this mob bobbing up the first time we did it and I've gone, who owns Energy Australia? Energy Australia, another company called Energy Australia in the British Virgin Islands, which makes the Caymans look like a bunch of good guys. That's where the really dodgy tax dodging going on. The British Virgin Islands, that's where real dodgy stuff. So Richard Branson, in fact, he's got his own island in the British Virgin Islands.
Of course he does. Well, it makes sense. It's on brand.
So he's got numbers on the board, but. So anyway, I've gone Energy Australia, British Virgin Islands, and then who owns that? Oh, this is some mob CLP in Hong Kong, and then who owns that? Well, the guy that controls that is a Chinese billionaire living in London. Energy Australia
is just
controlled by a Chinese billionaire living in London via the British Virgin Islands.
What?
Now, they've changed the structure since we outed them for that, but
I'm sure it's still dodgy.
So when the government, and this is what the governments are so boneheaded about privatisation, let's sell it to the British Virgin Islands.
Yes. So that's where privatisation leads. All the profits that we could have if we owned it as public government infrastructure, all those profits we could have, pay tax, money stays in, cycles around, does good things. Instead, we decide to privatise and... without even passing it through through paying tax, it just siphons straight out to buy another yacht for some Chinese London living. Well, mansions in London are probably pretty expensive, so that's probably where some of our money's gone.
Well, Origin Energy.
Origin.
That's the other one.
That's another one. Origin Energy, everybody.
There's a bid for that.
You'll check your power bill, that's them. So I'm just going to rattle off some names and some logos may or may not pop up. Virgin Australia, Exxon Mobil, Santos. Hey, buddies at Santos, you're paying nothing. 0.57%, 1.52%. Next to nothing. Don't insult us. Toll Holdings, what's that? That's
Transport.
Bloody Transport. What's some other?
Murray Goulburn is a milk co-op. It's like an agriculture co-op. Spotless Group is a bunch of sort of industrial sort of cleaning businesses and stuff like that. Fletcher Building, New Zealand's biggest company. They've always been pretty bad tax dodgers here, but then again, they have struggled to make profits even during a building boom. You've got to bear in mind that Hewlett Packard's a basket case that probably shouldn't be making any profit, but
okay, so you should only be on this list.
But this is 9 years.
If you're a bad company, if your company should be bust, or you're stealing money from Aussie punters.
Well, when you get the critics saying, "Well, hang on, mate, you don't know the difference between profit and revenue," I say to them, hang on, this is now 9 years of data. What are you saying to me?
Your business sucks.
That your business is so bad that you can't make a profit in 9 years. Yes. What are you? Qantas or something?
So, and I guess that's the thing with this whole system, it's come up. People will say, oh, but it's profit. But clearly, if your income is $31 billion in 9 years, and you're saying that the only thing you should pay tax on, not even tax, what you should pay tax on, is $30 million, Something's up.
Well, Vodafone are classic. They're terrible whingers, Vodafone. Most of these guys are big and ugly enough that when I come and hammer them, they just take their medicine and just wait for me to go away. But Vodafone said, oh, how dare you impugn our corporate integrity by suggesting that we are tax avoiders?
Yeah.
I'm going, hang on, how long there's huge losses we've sunk into this country, the investment in Australia and da-da-da-da-da.
We know
and I'm
business
going, well,
only...
hang on. So how long have you been here for? Like, you've been here 10 years. What, you're saying to me that, when do you expect to make a profit? You tell me then.
Yeah.
Because they don't. Of course, Vodafone are noted tax dodgers back in the UK as well.
Vodafone. You hear that? Vodafone,
yeah.
So... I guess the final land the plane, what can be done about it? So punters are listening, they watch my content, they comment all the time, and they say, oh, I'm so outraged, I love your stuff, but now I'm depressed. What is like the punter, like is there hope? We now know what's going on. What's the move?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, community people now know. I mean, all the time on social media, I'm seeing stuff regurgitated about, well, why don't they make the corporates pay tax?
So the more people that know.
The more people that know, that will affect... At the end of the day, politicians do care about their money coming in through their donations. But there's one thing.
Yes?
They care about more.
Really?
Well, once every 3 years. One Saturday every 3 years. We go down and we vote. And so if we're out of office and we don't get any more money.
True.
So
true. They only get money
votes.
if they're in office, and we're the ones that put them in office. So if this is the issue, if everyone gets on michaelwestmedia.com, and is it Michael West Media? What's the Michael?
That's it, Michael West Media. But
MichaelWest.com. You look at this list, and if we just become aware when we see these bloody logos, maybe they'll all pop up here. You can just look at them and go, you're a tax dodger. And the more aware people know, then politicians, then they start to hear what we're talking about. And if they want our votes, this is the thing. So I guess where I've landed the plane on a few things, get your thoughts on it. They say we can't afford things. In this country that has apparently every resource ever, they say we can't afford dental and Medicare. They say we can't afford to have our healthcare system function properly without 2-year wait times. They say we can't afford all these things.
Public housing. We've got to borrow money to put the future fund to give you public housing.
We can't afford to build enough homes for us Aussies to live in. But what I'm hearing from you is there's a lot of money that we are getting scammed directly out of that could, above and beyond, pay for everything you think we deserve as citizens?
They could. Well, my estimate is, and the tax office says it's about $2 billion, but of course they've got a vested interest. Most people I chat to that are tax lawyer types would agree that probably $50 billion a year is siphoned out to tax havens in tax avoidance and evasion, right? We're talking trillions of dollars parked in tax havens.
Sitting there.
Now, it's not actually physically there either. True. It's just parked
it's on a ledger
in a notional sense. Well, what you do is you just say to your lawyer, can you put it here, and then I'm going to give you instructions to pay somebody over here. So it might not even, it's not actually in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah.
That's just a roost to shift it around, to change
Because there's no boatload of money going.
There's no boat. So
to give a little context around, so you're saying tax lawyers are $50 billion a year.
I reckon it's about that gets sucked out. So what you're saying is when they say we can't afford to pay for it, whether it's housing or dental or whatever, they can afford to pay for it. It's what they choose to spend the money on. We just saw Richard Marles he suddenly found this magical $50 billion for weapons and missiles.
And no qualms. So
No, they're all very proud to be spending $50 billion more on top of the $370 billion for the submarines, which will never arrive.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of what they choose to spend money on.
So I think I want to land this on, we keep being told we can't afford things as important as housing and medicine. You said $50 billion a year is leaving through these dodgy tax dodgers. That's what it is, at least to the punter.
Well, the company's there. You can see they're not paying any tax. And Lend-Lease is a classic. Lend-Lease has not paid tax in Australia for 10 years. Lend-Lease, the big construction, which gets government construction gigs. No tax. They've been paying their executives a lot of money.
And the government could say, we'll only employ a company that will pay tax.
They could say that.
They could say that.
They could make PWs.
It's just like this.
Well, there's lots of things they could do.
Yes.
It's whether they've got the political will. But to go to the guts of your question, it's the name and shame.
Yeah.
Like you can write great big noble waffles about, this principle and that principle. nobody will ever take any notice. The minute you nail, BHP or Pfizer or Vodafone or Lend-Lease, people go, shit, I'm a shareholder in that company. That's not good for our reputation. Or the directors go, that's not a good look having this guy calling us tax cheats. So we're going to have to pay. So, which it's not, because now there is a social expectation.
Because if you have to pay taxes, I bloody have to pay tax. Well, I don't get a choice. So why should they?
Their children go to schools here or childcare. The multinational foreign executives that come here from, say, Wilmar, the Singaporean sugar company, right? All the executives are paid. They do pay income tax on their pay, but why should the company not pay tax here? If something goes wrong, they go to the police. They're protected by the Australian Army and Defence Forces. They enjoy all the premiums that come from a Westminster
a lovely,
legal
stable
system.
democracy.
They're always in court.
Yeah.
Look at the billionaires fighting each other, 9 and 7 and 10 and all these foreign media companies using our courts, which cost us money, to fight their vanity cases like Ben Roberts-Smith and what's the latest dodgy guy?
Bruce
Lerman.
Yep.
This is all funded by us. So what I'm saying is that you can go to Rupert Murdoch's News Corp and go, how much tax you pay last year, Rupert? 0. And so when you hear them rabbiting on in the Daily Telly or the Australian about, welfare cheats and all this stuff, go, how much tax you pay last year?
Yeah.
Oh, she paid none again.
Who's the real welfare
So
doll
you
bodger?
are a corporate welfare cheat. So what I think the answer is just everyone keep a watching brief and go, well, actually, News Corp, do they pay tax? No. Vodafone? No. Qantas? Well, they do when it's a good year, but once every 6 or 8 years they might pay tax.
They're not the greatest
Virgin
taxpayers.
never paid tax. So what's the story? Lend-Lease haven't paid for 10 years. There should be cachet that goes with it. People should go, are they good citizens or are they not
and at least
citizens?
That's the starting point, and that gives governments license to move. But I think the real clincher is to just really hammer home. I'm looking at figures here. You can fact check the figures if you want. I'm pulling up a Guardian article that says to build enough social housing to meet demand, right? To build enough social housing to meet demand, $10 billion over 10 years. So $1 billion a year. You reckon it should be more?
I reckon it's more than that.
Let's double it. Let's triple it. Let's say it's more than... Let's say it's $50 billion in 5 years to build enough housing.
If you were taxing Apple and Google and Amazon correctly, on what, let's just say, just rule of thumb, 1/10 your profit margin, so you make $1 for every $1 in profit for every 10 that come in the door.
Yeah.
Let's just say that's 10% is a reasonable profit margin. Google it to be 80%, but let's just say 10%, right?
Yeah.
So what's that going to be on 10 billion? That's $1 billion. So 30% of that's 300 million. Do they pay 300 million? No, they don't.
Yeah. So they don't even come close. But if you're saying that $50 billion a year leaves the country and that we're missing out on, and let's just ramp this number up for building enough social housing. Let's say it cost $2 billion a year to build enough social housing. We've still got $48 billion left to invest in.
Well, you could
whatever
do better
we
than
want.
that. You could hit climate change at the same time, because what you could say is all fossil fuel companies that produce coal and gas will now no longer pay tax on their profits, but they'll pay 5% of their revenue on a quarterly basis.
Why the hell not?
That would bring in, suddenly it'd be like Norway. You stick it into a sovereign wealth fund, you help save the planet, but also you can spend, you'd make $20 billion a year that you could spend on public housing.
So every issue that's popping up in the public consciousness now, students like me, bloody HECS debts through the roof, public housing, big problem, Medicare, paying lots of these things. The numbers you're talking about, we can solve every single one and not have one Peter Dutton whinge about where's the money coming from. It sounds like it's bloody coming from here. We could do it.
It's doable. And the uni one's huge. I mean, when I went to uni, we were paid to go to uni. Not the other way around. You didn't borrow. We were actually paid here. It was a system called T's. Here, we will pay you. And we were a bit pissed off that we had to pay for our own books.
Entitled generation you are. So, I don't know where we land the plane, but I think the money's there. We are not a poor country. So when I hear Jim Chalmers say they can't afford something, bullshit.
They don't want to afford it.
Absolute bullshit. If you want to find the money, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, this guy will help you.
Yeah, I'll help you.
All right. Great. I think we kind of I understand a little bit more. Hopefully people watching understand a little bit more. Like and comment below. Ask any questions you have. What would you like to spend your $50 billion a year on? And that's not even talking about mining royalties. Maybe another video.
So it's great to chat to Konrad here from Punters Politics. It's been a good session on multinational tax avoidance, and hopefully we'll be catching up for a few yarns in the future.